Usually, when we talk about how a new genre of music is created, there's this underlying expectation of deliberate intention.
Right, yeah. Like it was completely planned out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We picture like a composer sitting at a piano in a quiet room, writing notes on a page, or maybe a band getting together in a garage and just deciding to invent a new sound. We expect a blueprint.
Yeah, we really prefer to think of art as a conscious choice, right? Like it's a deliberate expression of a specific emotion or an idea by an individual artist who's just sitting in a vacuum.
But then you step into the world of early 1990s London, and that entire blueprint is just totally thrown out the window
Oh, completely.
because we're looking at a musical landscape that it wasn't composed so much as it was involuntarily forced into existence.
Yeah, it's the absolute definition of an acoustic reflex. I mean, it's a massive, sprawling city reacting to immense physical and societal pressure.
Okay, so let's unpack this because today, for all of you listening, we are taking a deep dive into a fascinating music and culture column from MMR. It's titled Jungle Sounds, London's Urban Tension.
And it's a fantastic piece of writing.
It really is. And our mission today isn't just to review a music genre for the sake of nostalgia. We are going on an acoustic forensic investigation here.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at how a city's socioeconomic pressures, its immigration patterns, and even the literal rule of law forced a completely new chaotic sound into existence. We're talking about early 90s jungle music.
Right. And we are going to treat this music not just as entertainment for the dance floor, but as an audio historical record.
Yeah.
Because if you listen closely, this sound is a real-time recording of a city being pushed to its absolute physical and mental limits.
So before we can even talk about the music itself, we really have to set the physical stage. Because you can't understand the beat without understanding the streets it came from.
Exactly.
So what did London actually feel like in the early 90s?
Well, according to the source, you had four main pillars of tension silently accumulating. It was creating this massive pressure cooker environment.
Okay.
First, there was rapid, aggressive urban redevelopment. Neighborhoods were changing really fast. Physical spaces were decaying or just being demolished outright.
Which obviously displaces the people who have lived there forever.
Right, displacing long-term residents. And then second, layered right on top of that was a sharp rise in unemployment.
Oof.
Yeah, so that creates this palpable daily sense of economic anxiety.
So people are losing their physical neighborhoods,
Hmm.
and they are simultaneously losing their livelihoods. That is a lot of stress.
It's massive. And then you bring in the third pillar, which is the expansion of immigrant communities. You had these incredibly diverse cultures being brought into closer, sometimes very cramped physical proximity in these decaying urban spaces.
Right, so a lot of friction, but also a lot of cultural mixing.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth pillar, which kind of acts as the lid on this whole pressure cooker, was intensifying police crackdowns.
Right, the authorities stepping in.
Yeah, law enforcement was aggressively tightening its grip on the city's youth and underground cultures. They were specifically trying to shut down how these groups gathered.
You know, the image that keeps coming to my mind as you say that is a physical fault line. Or, to make it even simpler, like a shaken up soda can.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Because you have all these volatile, pressurized ingredients, right?
Right.
The gentrification, joblessness, cultural collision, and aggressive police pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And they are all just being shaken violently inside a confined urban space.
Mm-hmm.
So if pressure always finds the way to escape, is it fair to say jungle wasn't composed by musicians, but rather vented by the city itself?
I mean, what's fascinating here is that the column explicitly argues that jungle was not a planned genre.
Really?
Yeah, no one sat down in studio on a Tuesday and said, I'm going to invent jungle music today. It was a real-time reactionary translation of that physical urban tension and cultural fragmentation directly into an acoustic structure. The DJs and producers were just reacting to the atmosphere in the room, translating the anxiety and the energy of the crowd straight into the machines.
So the city was the composer. The producers were just the instruments rendering it into audio.
Exactly. The physical pressure of London was literally materializing itself into sound.
But the general atmospheric pressure in the city is only half the story, isn't it? From this abstract sense of tension, we move to a very specific, tangible catalyst.
Yes, we do.
And if you were listening to this right now, this is where it gets incredibly strange. We are talking about a literal government law that accidentally forced the music to mutate.
Yeah, this is one of the wildest parts of the whole era. To understand this mechanism, we have to look slightly backwards to the late 1980s and early 90s.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So London and the surrounding countryside had this massive rave and acid house culture. It was all about these giant, illegal, open-air parties happening in fields and abandoned warehouses.
People just showing up with huge sound systems in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly, thousands of people. And the political establishment at the time absolutely hated it. They viewed it as a public nuisance and a literal threat to order.
So they stepped in.
They did. So in 1994, the government introduced a piece of legislation called the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act.
Wait, let's pause on that, because normally, if a government wants to shut down a party, they introduce noise curfews or strict trespassing laws.
Right.
Or they go after the organizers for not having permits. But they didn't just do that here, did they?
No, they went much, much further. The law specifically targeted events playing music that was characterized by, and this is a direct quote from the legislation, the emission of a succession of repetitive beats.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
They literally wrote the rhythm of a drum beat into criminal law.
They attempted to outlaw a rhythmic structure, yes. They were specifically targeting the simple four-on-the-floor kick drum pattern of house and techno.
Let's make sure we clearly define that for anyone who isn't like a music producer. When we say four on the floor or repetitive beats, what does that actually sound like?
So it's the pulse you hear in almost all traditional dance music or disco. Boom, 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 boom.
Very steady.
Exactly. A steady, predictable kick drum hitting on every single beat of the measure. It's designed to be hypnotic and easy to dance to.
Right.
And the government figured if they made it illegal to gather and play that specific hypnotic rhythm, the rave culture would just die out.
That is wild. So by literally outlawing simple, predictable, repetitive beats, the police essentially forced these underground producers to create the most complex, chaotic, non-repetitive rhythms imaginable just to avoid getting their sound systems confiscated and being thrown in jail.
It is a stunning example of unintended consequences.
Yeah, it totally backfired.
The regulation didn't kill the culture at all. It accelerated the music's evolution. If playing a simple, repetitive beat was a legal liability, well, you had to break the beat apart.
It's like acoustic camouflage. The law said don't repeat, so the producers said fine, we'll shatter the beat into 1,000 unpredictable pieces so you literally can't classify it.
Precisely. Producers had to move entirely away from simple structures. And this is where a piece of audio called the amen break becomes the most vital tool in their arsenal.
Okay, I've definitely heard this term thrown around in music history, but let's break it down to its absolute basics. What is the amen break?
At its core, the amen break is originally just a very short 6-second acoustic drum solo from a 1969 soul record by a group called the Winstons.
Just 6 seconds long.
Yeah, it's a fantastic, highly energetic drum fill. But early jungle producers didn't just loop it. They took this short phrase, fed it into their digital samplers, and began slicing it up into tiny, microscopic audio fragments.
Let's talk about those digital samplers for a second, because we can't assume everyone knows how early 90s music technology actually worked.
Good point.
Like today, you can load endless audio files onto a laptop. But back then, how did slicing up a beat physically happen?
Well, producers were using hardware like the Akai samplers, which had a comically small amount of memory by today's standards. We're talking sometimes just a couple of megabytes.
Oh, wow, that's nothing.
Yeah, you couldn't load a whole song. You loaded that 6-second drum break, and then you physically assigned different fractions of a second to different keys on a MIDI keyboard.
Okay.
So you put the kick drum on one key, the snare on another, the crash cymbal on another.
So instead of a drummer playing a drum kit, you have a producer playing fragments of a pre-recorded drum kit on a piano keyboard, just infinitely reconstructing the pattern.
Yes. They chopped it, sped it up, reversed tiny pieces of it.
And that completely bypassed the legal definition of repetitive because the rhythm was constantly shifting, stuttering, and splintering.
Exactly. That heavily fragmented, unpredictable drum pattern became the new rhythmic core of jungle.
So now that we know why the rhythm had to change to evade the law, we need to dive into how this new sound actually functioned, both technically and culturally. Because it wasn't just fast drums.
No, not at all. Let's break down the anatomy of the jungle sound. First, as we established, the speed. Because they sped up these old drum samples, the music operates at around 160 to 170 beats per minute.
Which is basically the pace of a human sprinting.
It's incredibly fast,
Yeah.
but underneath that frantic, hyperactive drum pattern, you have a completely contrasting element, which is the sub bass.
And where did that come from?
This element was derived directly from the city's Jamaican reggae and dub sound system culture.
Okay, let's ELI5 that sub-bass concept for a minute, because we aren't just talking about like a low note on a bass guitar, are we?
Not at all. Sub bass operates at extremely low frequencies, often below 60 hertz.
That's super low.
It is engineered specifically so it isn't just something you process with your ears. It is meant to be felt physically in your chest cavity, literally vibrating your ribs.
So you have the high-end drums sprinting at 170 BPM and the low-end bass just crawling underneath it, shaking the actual architecture of the club.
Yeah, it's a brilliant contrast. Then you add the cultural layer on top. You had raga MCs, vocalists, heavily influenced by Jamaican dancehall, shouting over the tracks using specific patois phrases and slang.
Right, patois being the English-based Creole language with West African influences spoken in Jamaica. So they're bringing that direct immigrant cultural experience right into the vocal booth.
Exactly. It wasn't just random noise. It was a multi-layered, highly technical reflection of London's diverse demographics. But perhaps the most mind-bending concept regarding how this sound functioned is how it manipulated what the source calls the density of time.
Yes, the density of time. Let's really dig into that, because musically 170 BPM is fast, sure, but it isn't physically impossible to tap your foot to.
Right.
So why does jungle feel so much faster than its actual speed? Is it like an auditory illusion?
It absolutely is an illusion, and it's rooted in how the human brain processes rhythm. Because the producers were taking those breakbeats and fine-tuning their placement down to the millisecond, they packed an overwhelming amount of rhythmic information into every single bar of music.
Okay, so it's the amount of notes, not just the speed.
Exactly. The snare isn't just hitting on the 2 and the 4. There are ghost notes, stutters, and micro-edits happening in the microscopic spaces between the beats.
So they were cramming more percussive events into a single second than the brain is used to processing.
Yeah.
The ear is desperately searching for a steady ankle point, and because it keeps shifting, time itself feels compressed.
The essence of jungle wasn't just sheer velocity, it was the active deconstruction and reconstruction of time perception.
And because of those aggressive police crackdowns on the big rave events we talked about, this complex, time-bending music had to find a new way to reach people, right? It moved away from the giant fields and went deep underground into the network of illegal pirate radio stations.
Pirate radio was basically the nervous system of the jungle scene.
Wow.
We are talking about illegal transmitters physically rigged up in the dead of night on the roofs of high-rise council estates, broadcasting signals across London.
That's intense.
It was. They were playing a constant cat-and-mouse game with the authorities, who were always trying to triangulate their signal and shut them down.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Ah.
Today, you and I rely entirely on Spotify or Apple Music algorithms to feed us new sounds.
Oh, for sure.
They constantly A/B test our listening habits to see what keeps us engaged. But these pirate radio DJs were essentially modern-day flesh and blood algorithms.
That's a great way to think about it. They were real-time curators. Keep in mind, these tracks were not distributed by major record labels on CDs or cassettes.
Right, they were cut onto dub plates. And for anyone listening who is used to just hitting upload on a digital file, explain what a dub plate is, because it's a completely foreign concept now.
A dub plate is essentially a temporary vinyl record. Instead of being pressed in a factory from hard vinyl, a dub plate is an aluminum disc coated in soft acetate.
Okay.
A producer would finish a track in their bedroom studio, take it to a cutting house, and have the audio physically carved into this soft disc.
And because it's soft acetate, it degrades over time.
Right. Yes, very quickly. You can only play it maybe 40 or 50 times before the needle literally destroys the grooves and the sound quality just vanishes.
So the producer rushes this freshly cut, degrading disc to the pirate radio station, or the underground club, and the DJ plays it over the airwaves.
Exactly.
So a track wasn't a finished, static product sitting on a shelf. It was a fluid process.
Totally fluid.
Like if a specific heavy bass drop worked and the DJ saw the club go wild or the pirate radio switchboard lit up with callers, the producer might go back to the studio the very next day, make that bass line even heavier, and cut a brand new dub plate.
Yes. The music was a living, breathing conversation between the producer, the DJ, and the physical reaction of the city.
Which brings us to the individuals driving that conversation. Because while jungle was a collective urban phenomenon, there were specific pioneers who weaponized these sounds and shaped the movement between 1994 and 1995.
Right. And it's important to look at how different producers used these tools because the scene wasn't just a monolith.
Let's talk about that. Let's go through some of the faces of the movement.
Let's start with the aggressive end of the spectrum, with a producer like Remark and his track R.I.P. Remark is a fascinating study in innovation through limitation. He was an absolute master of the chopped breakbeat.
This goes back to what we were saying about those early samplers having almost zero memory, right?
Yes, because his equipment was so limited, he was forced to slice samples into smaller and smaller microfragments just to fit them in the machine.
Wow.
But instead of seeing that as a hurdle, he weaponized it. He created these incredibly intricate, chaotic, and almost violently aggressive drum grooves that defined the harder, darker edge of jungle.
So if the scene was built on this aggressive, chaotic, urban tension, was there any room for people who just wanted to, like, breathe?
Yeah.
Did anyone try to take this manic rhythm and make it atmospheric?
That is exactly where LTJ Brookham enters the picture. He proved that jungle didn't always have to sound like an acoustic assault.
Okay, how to do that?
With tracks like Horizons, he pioneered a subgenre that focused on ambient, floating, jazz-influenced textures.
So he took that 170 BPM sprinting drum structure, but draped it in these gorgeous, slow-moving synthesizer chords.
Exactly. It was music that worked on the sweaty dance floor, but was equally meant for deep, cerebral home listening. He would literally test out these spatial, atmospheric tracks in the club, read the crowd's reaction, and tweak the spatial audio mixing live.
Okay, so we have Remark's chopped chaos built from technical limitations and Bookham's spatial atmospheric breathing room. But what about the visual and emotional aesthetic of the city? Did anyone capture that?
For that, we have to look at Goldie and his seminal 1994 track, Inner City Life. Now, Goldie was originally a visual graffiti artist stepping into an audio space.
And how did a visual artist translate that background into a musical genre built on chopped drums?
Well, he brought a highly layered, almost cinematic visual sensibility to the music. He consciously wanted to step away from the heavy, male-dominated, aggressive raga sound and create something lyrical. Inner City Life featured sweeping strings and soaring female vocals. It captured the profound loneliness, but also the hope of urban living. It proved jungle could carry immense emotional weight.
So we have this complex ecosystem of ambient jazz, aggressive chopped beats, and cinematic emotion. But what happens when an underground culture, built in literal defiance of the law, suddenly spills into the mainstream?
We see that happen with tracks like Original Nutta by Shy FX and UK Apache.
That's a classic.
It is. The production was done on relatively simple gear, but its rawness and heavy Jamaican dancehall influence was its superpower. It completely blew up, taking this underground illegal sound and pushing it right into the mainstream pop charts.
Which leads to a massively complicated moment for the scene, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because you get this massive crossover hit with General Levy's track. Incredible. I mean, it was huge. It was everywhere. But instead of the scene celebrating their mutual success, it caused a massive rift.
Yeah, a huge controversy.
General Levy was accused of being too commercial, and it even led to the scene temporarily banning his music from their own underground radio stations.
Yeah.
So my question is, why does a culture born from unity and shared pressure instantly fracture the moment it gets a taste of commercial success?
That raises such an important question about the soul of underground movements and the paradox of counterculture.
Right.
Incredible had a very catchy, pop-leaning hook, but for the purists who built the scene in the illegal raves and pirate stations, that commercialization felt like a betrayal.
Because the scene wasn't just a style of music to them. It was a physical sanctuary from the very establishment that was now consuming and commodifying the music on daytime radio.
Exactly. The controversy around General Levy proved that jungle was a collision of intense, sometimes contradictory human energies. It wasn't just a unified front against the police, it was a complex ecosystem fighting over its own identity and ownership of its culture.
It's like the immense pressure from the city created this diamond, but once the mainstream light hit the diamond, the underground started fighting over who held the rights to it.
That's a great analogy.
Which brings us to our final section, the evolution. Because every volatile reaction eventually stabilizes. We have to explore how the raw, fragmented energy of early jungle matured into the sleek architecture of drum and bass.
So by the mid-90s, specifically around 1996, the timeline shifts. The term drum and bass becomes cemented as the descriptor for the music, and a major pivot point in this transition was Goldie's full-length album, Timeless.
A perfect title, considering what it did for the genre's longevity.
Oh, absolutely. The album took the core mechanical elements of jungle, but presented them in a much more refined, abstract, and minimal way.
So the sound changed.
Yeah, the heavy raga vocal samples and the chaotic patois shouts began to fade out. The sound was being engineered with high-end production values, designed just as much for a pristine living room stereo as it was for a blown-out underground club speaker.
So what does this all mean for the genre? If I'm looking at this shift, I kind of see it like the process of refining crude oil into high-octane aviation fuel.
I like where you're going with this.
Well, when you pull crude oil out of the ground, that's early jungle. It's thick, it's messy, it's raw, it's full of grit and friction from the earth.
Yeah.
But when you put it through a refinery, you get drum and bass.
Yes.
The raw materials, the deep sub-bass frequencies, the complex breakbeats are exactly the same. The chemical makeup of the music is identical, but the delivery system has been polished, smoothed out, and streamlined.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. The evolution into drum and bass was not the death of jungle. It was simply its next inevitable form as technology improved and the producers matured. The core acoustic blueprint remained completely intact.
Just cleaner and more aerodynamic.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the broader context of British music, the overarching argument of the source material is about legacy.
Right. Where did it lead?
Jungle didn't just turn into drum bass and stop. The DNA of those fragmented beats, that specific acoustic reaction to London's physical pressure, directly seeded massive later UK genres.
Like grime.
Grime music, UK garage, dubstep, they all owe their structural existence and their reliance on heavy sub-bass and syncopated rhythms to the blueprints drafted by those early jungle producers.
So jungle was basically the root system for an entire tree of modern UK culture.
It really was. It proved that you could take the decaying, fragmented reality of city life, run it through a sampler, and turn it into a sustainable, globally recognized art form.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. If you're listening to this, the one thing to take away from this deep dive is that jungle wasn't just a collection of fast drum loops made by people trying to make you dance.
Right.
It was the literal acoustic translation of a specific time and place.
It was the inevitable result of what happens when rapid gentrification, economic anxiety, immigrant cultural collision, and a government literally outlawing a drum beat all collide over illegal radio frequencies.
The government tried to ban a simple beat, and the city responded by inventing an entirely new rhythmic language that changed global music forever. It's an incredible story.
It truly is.
But before we wrap up, I know you have one final thought on this that really takes the core thesis of this history and applies it to our present day. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so if we look closely at how this played out, jungle was the unavoidable acoustic record of 1990s physical urban tension.
Right.
It was the sound of people physically crammed into decaying physical spaces, colliding with each other in sweaty clubs, sharing physical dub plates. So it leaves me wondering about the tension of today. What will the sound of today's tension be?
Because the pressure hasn't gone away, it's just changed shape.
Exactly.
Wow.
We live in a deeply isolated, digitally fragmented, remote working world. The pressure is still there, but it's invisible. It's digital. We aren't colliding in abandoned warehouses. We are colliding in comment sections and algorithmic echo chambers. So when our modern, quiet, physically isolated pressures finally burst into an audio format, when this invisible tension demands to be vented, what will that rhythm actually sound like?
Wow. If jungle was the chaotic, fast-paced sound of physical urban collision, what is the sound of our digital remote isolation? That is an incredible question to leave off on. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep digging into your own sources, keep looking past the surface of things, and always remember to find the hidden stories inside the noise. Until next time.